listener production.
Hello, welcome to the final deep dive of 2024 on The Briefing. I'm Sacha Barbour Gatt, and joining me is my co-host Bension Siebert. And it has been another massive year in news, from an attempted assassination of Donald Trump to the Bondi stabbing, viral penguins to the Wicked press tour, not to mention the Olympics, multiple crises in the Middle East, an Oasis reunion, and a first-of-its-kind social media ban. There is a lot to unpack. So in this episode, Bension and I will be recapping, remembering, and retelling the biggest news stories of 2024, the good, the bad, and the viral. Bension, let's get into what I think was undeniably the biggest news story of 2024, and that was the US presidential election.
Yes, Sacha, it has been impossible to miss the eye-popping drama of the most powerful country on the planet tearing itself to pieces in an election that would come to elevate this reality TV star, insurrection inspirer. Let's be honest, he's a serial liar. And the man promising to make America great again, Donald Trump, to the Oval Office for the second time.
I want to thank the American people for the extraordinary honor of being elected your 47th president and your 45th president.
American elections start approximately 2 minutes after the last one finished, but the big thing people focused on this year was the sitting president, Joe Biden, was really very old. People noticed this, and not that he was that much older than Trump, but visibly older than when he first became president. And we have to remember, this is the guy who was famous for gaffes his whole career, but every time he misstated a name or a sentence he fumbled in 2024 became another nail in his political coffin. And it all came to a head when Biden became truly incoherent in a few spots during the debate against Trump.
Making sure that we're able to make every single solitary person eligible for what I've been able to do with the COVID, with dealing with everything we have to do with, look, if we finally beat Medicare.
Not that Trump has ever been that coherent, but he gets away with it because it's part of his charm. Anyway, we'd all been waiting for more than a month to see whether Biden would bend to the pressure. And let's just take a little look behind the curtain here at The Briefing. Our boss, Jess, gave me the day off on one particular Monday, and she said to me expressly, "You can have the day off unless Joe Biden steps down." We'd been preparing for this for months. So that was the day that I accidentally left my phone on silent and slept through the whole thing. But you guys did an excellent job. So anyway, Joe Biden steps down and Vice President Kamala Harris starts batting away the idea that there's any other viable competitor to the Democratic nomination. And as all this is happening, Trump gets up to speak at a rally in Pennsylvania and is shot in the ear by an attempted assassin.
If you want to really see something that's said, take a look at what happened.
And then he was received with godlike status at this wild and bizarre Republican National Convention not too long later. People might remember that featured Hulk Hogan.
When they took a shot at my hero, and they tried to kill the next president of the United States. Enough was enough, and I said, let Trumpomania run wild, brother. Let Trumpomania rule again. Let Trumpomania make America great again.
At this point, Trump looked completely unstoppable, but Kamala Harris did go on to clinch the nomination. She strutted onto the political stage with this hyper-memeable entry into the race that was, of course, boosted by Charlie XCX's tweet that Kamala Harris is brat. You think you just fell out of a coconut tree, all of those.
You think you just fell out of a coconut? My mother used to give us a coconut. Everything is in context.
So next up, with Kamala locked in, she appointed wholesome dad type Tim Walz, who rose to fame calling Trump weird. Trump appointed J.D. Vance, who was a rags to riches guy who once speculated Trump might become America's Hitler, but apparently changed his mind on that one. And from there, Democrats framed the election as prosecutor, versus felon, whereas the Republicans went on to frame it as a radical leftist versus the greatest president in history who'll improve the economy and stop a flood of migrants crossing the southern border. Now, at the only Harris versus Trump debate that we saw, Kamala spoke passionately about abortion rights and was generally considered the winner at the time as well. Trump said migrants were eating people's cats and dogs, but no one was really shocked by anything he was saying at that stage.
In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets of the people that live there.
And it is pretty much neck and neck in the polls for most of this period. And although Kamala did have a lot of early momentum, it just wasn't enough. In almost every state and across most demographics, voters swung towards Trump. And by about 6:30 p.m. our time on the day of the US election, it was clear that Trump was going to win. And Bension, I'm keen to hear as well, like what you took away from the result at the time and how you think looking into 2025.
Well, I think the first point to make is that people cared a whole lot more about the cost of living, inflation, and fears about migrants than they did about democracy and abortion rights in the US. We've seen the very same dynamic playing out in Canada with the crisis of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's government right now. Second, I think Kamala Harris was just not the right candidate to beat Trump. Around the world, we've seen sitting governments fall because people are furious about inflation and the cost of living and looking for someone to blame. And who do people blame? Migrants. Harris was incapable of separating herself from Joe Biden's presidency and his legacy, and she actively decided against doing so when she had the chance.
Would you have done something differently than President Biden during the past 4 years?
There is not a thing that comes to mind in terms of, and I've been a part of most of the decisions that have had impact.
But Sash, that's quite enough about the US. Let's bring us home and talk about what made headlines in Australia.
Yeah, a lot happened in 2024. So I think the best way to step this out is to go month by month, because otherwise we'll just be in this huge jumble of news stories. So let's go from February. And that was when we saw the disappearance of Samantha Murphy, the mum from Ballarat. Her body is still yet to be found at the time of recording, but a 23-year-old man has been charged with her murder, and the matter returns to the courts in the new year. And there was another high-profile murder case in the same month, Bension, the killing of Sydney couple Luke Baird and Jesse Davies. A police officer is accused of using his force-issued gun to murder the pair, and he is returning to court as well in 2025. But in much lighter news out of February, the PM got engaged to his partner Jodie Hayden, and a debate was sparked by Nationals MP Barnaby Joyce about drug and alcohol testing our pollies. Remember this, when he was filmed lying on a Canberra street talking on the phone, apparently intoxicated.
I made a big mistake. There's no excuse for it. There's a reason. And, it's a very eventful walk home, wasn't it?
Now, March brought us a few key stories in law and order and politics. Queensland passed coercive control laws.
This legislation is a mighty step towards Queensland empowering countless women across the state to fight against domestic and family violence.
Tasmanians voted in their state election, with the Liberals winning a fourth term, while Alice Springs in the Northern Territory witnessed youth violence, with local authorities enforcing a nighttime curfew. Now, that measure was brought in again in July, and right now there is talk again about bringing one in after a recent violent home invasion, which involved the injuring of a 2-month-old child. Moving forward to April now, and with the Easter month came the horrific Bondi stabbing, which saw 6 people killed. 5 of those were women, 1 was a man, and dozens more were injured. And what that sparked was a national outcry about violence against women.
And this is a national crisis. We're here today to demand that governments of all levels must do better, including my own, including every state and territory government.
As of today, 97 women have been killed by a man in Australia, and the issue was declared a national crisis, and the Albanese government committed almost $1 billion in the May budget to initiatives aimed at stamping it out. While after a very public battle, Bruce Lerriman's defamation trial ended with Justice Michael Lee declaring this.
Mr. Lerman raped Miss Higgins. Having escaped the lion's den, Mr. Lerman made the mistake of coming back for his hat.
Fast forward to June, and a huge moment came when Julian Assange was freed from a London prison, ending a more than 12-year ordeal by pleading guilty to a single charge of breaching the espionage law in the United States. We spoke to his brother here on The Briefing.
All the way through this battle, he's been very stoic, very determined to carry on with his mission and not to admit any kind of guilt. So having a plea deal wasn't something that supporters and people that know his vision, his ideas and his mission would not expect him to go for a plea deal.
The winter months also brought us the national vaping ban on July 1, with nicotine vapes now only legally sold in pharmacies, although if you've spent 5 minutes out on a weekend anywhere, I think it's pretty clear people are still very much buying vapes elsewhere. Anyway, in the same month, we had bombshell allegations about the CFMEU, that's the construction union, that had been infiltrated by organised criminals and bikies. We had a state election in the Northern Territory in which the Country Liberal Party won in a landslide, and there was the death of Jack Carlson, who was behind perhaps Australia's most well-known meme.
Gentlemen, this is Democracy Manifest. What is the charge? Eating a meal? A succulent Chinese meal?
Jumping ahead now to October, where there was another high-profile state election, this time in Queensland. The vote saw Labor booted from power after almost a decade. The LNP won the vote in a landslide after campaigning heavily on law and order, with youth crime in the state dominating headlines. This month also brought the royal visit from King Charles and Queen Camilla, and while it went off without much fuss, one hitch did materialise in the form of Senator Lydia Thorpe. Thorpe was eventually censured over the protest.
As we crept closer to the end of the year in November, an online debate erupted over Bonnie Blue and her quest to bed barely legal boys at Australian schoolies celebrations.
There's been hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people I've slept with, and I've not had one complaint yet. I've basically got 5 stars on TripAdvisor. So until that changes, then I'm still continuing.
And she ended up having her visa cancelled. Also in November, Alan Jones was arrested and charged with historic indecent assault and sexual touching offences, allegations which he denies. Now, the final month of the year, December, it was a big one. The Pollies were looking to rush through bills before the end of the sitting year, and by the Pollies, I mean Labor. This brought with it the passing of a world-first social media ban for Aussies under 16 years old, along with contentious housing bills. And the remaining 5 members of the Bali Nine were secretly flown home after serving almost 20 years for a drug smuggling plot, while anti-Semitism regained the spotlight with the firebombing attack of a synagogue in Melbourne, and Victoria's government announced yet another crackdown on protests, a trend we're seeing more and more of in Australia. But look, I think as we look back at all of this, we can say once again that cost of living really did dominate headlines throughout 2024. There were debates about affordable housing, and the cash rate, remember, it stayed on hold all year long. From the first meeting in February to the last one in December, it did not shift from that 4.35%. Supermarkets also copped it again this year. The ACCC announced it'd be suing Coles and Woolies over alleged fake discounts. There were more record profits. There were more hearings and inquiries into price gouging, as well as unfair pressure on suppliers. And of course, we also saw the resignation of Woolworths CEO Brad Banducci after that disastrous interview he had. And just to wrap up the Aussie section, Bension, there were also a few big political scalps that were claimed in 2024. Scott Morrison resigned in January. It's hard to believe that was this year. Bill Shorten quit in September, and Simon Birmingham in November. So a huge year for Australian news, but it was also a big one overseas. What international stories got us talking this year?
Well, no doubt the number one was obviously Gaza. On October 7, 2023, Hamas terrorists launched an invasion and an attack on Israel and killed around 1,200 Israelis, taking 250 hostages back into Gaza. Right now, 96 Israeli hostages are reportedly unaccounted for. 117 have been returned to Israel and 33 have have been killed. Those numbers pale in comparison with the tens of thousands of people Israel has killed in its military campaign to destroy Hamas in Gaza. This week, the number of Palestinians killed passed over 45,000 people. Most of those are women and children. Remember, half the population of Gaza is under 18. We've all seen the horrific footage of people being burned alive, crushed and bombed in Gaza. And in April, Israel's strike on aid organisation World Central Kitchen's clearly marked vehicles caused the death of 7 aid workers, including Australian Zomi Frankham.
And I think 2024 was, there were big developments because it was the year that the international courts started taking action. They found there was plausible case that Israel is committing genocide in Gaza and more recently issued arrest warrants for Israeli PM Benjamin Netanyahu and a leader of Hamas. And Hamas is one of several terrorist organisations backed by Iran, including Hezbollah in Lebanon. And in September, we saw the simultaneous explosion of thousands of pages in Lebanon by Israel, which killed more than 30 and maimed or injured thousands. Israel and Hezbollah have since signed a ceasefire but continue to bomb each other. And then there's the Houthis in Yemen, which you'd remember were disrupting global trade by attacking commercial vessels in the Red Sea earlier this year. And now we've had the collapse of Bashar al-Assad's brutal regime in Syria, and Israel, Turkey and Russia, among others, are jostling for power and influence there.
But armed conflict was by no means limited to the Middle East in 2024. As we know, Russia's war in Ukraine continued to rage, as did brutal civil wars in Sudan and Myanmar.
Look, other than all of the death and destruction we've just gone through, 2024 also was the world's biggest ever year of elections. Bension, Labor in the UK nearly completely annihilated the Conservatives after more than a decade of Tory rule. We saw the rise in Europe of parties of the far right. India held the world's largest election. Vladimir Putin was given another 6-year term in Russia. No surprises there. And just this week, the German government collapsed in a vote of no confidence. And that followed the path of the French government, which lost a vote of no confidence in its parliament earlier this month. Now, Canadian PM Justin Trudeau is currently in big trouble with the loss of his deputy PM. And South Korea's president has been impeached after he tried to impose martial law. So the year that was in international news.
Australia's Golden Girls trying to defend the medal. Kaylee McEwen, she's going to do it. Australia's warrior wins again. What an effort. What a champion.
It's hard to believe, but do you remember the Olympics were on this year?
I do actually.
Let's talk about some of the biggest moments in sport in 2024.
Yeah, 2024 saw the Penrith Panthers claim their 4th straight premiership.
But the Panthers have done it again. 4 premierships in a row.
The Brisbane Lions claimed the AFL flag, beating the Swans again, and that then saw the stepping down of longtime coach John Longmire.
I always thought that this would be my last contract at the Sydney Swans.
Tennis also farewelled 2 greats, Rafael Nadal and Andy Murray. But you're right, 2024 was really all about the Olympics, and it did start with controversy, first with the opening ceremony, because there was this scene that looked like an interpretation of the Last Supper, and it featured drag queens and trans models, and that angered Christians around the world and the Catholic Church. Organisers did apologise for this, but they said it was supposed to represent the Greek god Dionysus. So it kind of got off to a bit of a rocky start.
Yeah, it was a spectacle, wasn't it? But when it came to the sport, Paris delivered. In fact, it was declared Australia's most successful Olympics ever. Australia won 18 gold medals, breaking the previous record of 17 set in Athens in 2004 and Tokyo, and mostly thanks to our women's swimmers.
So Australia, the red-hot favourites, looking for a 5th gold medal in the pool here in Paris. Titmus turns ahead, but in the early hours of the morning, our Aussie girls are going to get it done again. Titmus in front. Our golden girls are simply glorious.
So we won 53 medals overall. Now, we did win 58 medals at the 2000 Sydney Olympics, but we didn't win as many golds, so that doesn't count. Australia finished 4th on the medal table in 2024 behind the United States, China and Japan, and the Fox sisters dominated, Jess and Noemi claiming 3 gold between them.
It's pretty special to know that I've been able to back it up, and definitely felt inspired by Ariane and Kaylee the other night who were dominating in the pool. And, you know, I love our team, and it's so special to be part of this Olympic team and to bring another one of these home for us.
For overseas athletes, meantime, Simone Biles cemented her GOAT status in gymnastics, and Novak Djokovic completed a career Grand Slam, winning gold and achieving every single tennis accolade that is available. So people said he'd completed tennis. There was nothing left for him to do. He should just retire, but he didn't.
Yeah, and there were some hilarious and lighthearted moments too. My mind definitely goes to the pole vaulter whose penis hit the bar on the way down. God, just imagine. The Turkish shooter who famously won silver while standing behind the gun with one hand, the other in his pocket. The fact that the River Seine had become the main character. I think more than once you called her a messy bitch on this podcast. And there was questions about how safe it was to swim in. But of course, the most memeable moment came from Ray Gunn.
Give it up to Ray Gunn!
Yeah, the Aussie breakdancer went viral after her frankly shocking performance in the inaugural display of breaking at the Olympics. It's worth noting, Bension, he did go from memeable to quite nasty. Ray Gunn, whose real name is Rachel Gunn, went to ground, and there was support for her. There was images that came out of her like dancing ahead of the closing ceremony with all of the other Aussie athletes, and there was this really positive vibe around her. But people on the internet did get mad, and they claimed she had made a mockery of the sport.
I'm glad I was able to bring some joy into your lives. That's what I hoped. I didn't realise that would also open the door to so much hate, which has frankly been pretty devastating.
But she hasn't gone away. She got management. Recently, she shut down a satirical musical being made by a comedian about her, and there are reports that her lawyers were going after the comedy club for $10,000 that was going to host this musical. So she's made choices since the Olympics, and she continues to be a household name. I just don't think you'll ever be able to think of the Paris Games without also thinking of Ray Gunn.
I just can't watch. It's so cringe. But let's go on to pop culture now. There was Brat Summer, Moo Deng and Wicked. What were your favourite moments and memes this year, Sacha?
The year started for me with Taylor Swift. It was huge. She was coming to Australia. She performed to more than 600,000 fans across 7 shows in Melbourne and Sydney. And her MCG shows, which had 96,000 people, were actually the biggest she's ever performed in her entire career.
Welcome to the Eras Tour.
The Eras Tour came to an end just this month in December earlier, and it was, a record breaker by all means. It made billions of US dollars, and yeah, it'll go down in history for sure. In March, though, came one of my favourite ever crazed internet theories, and that was the Kate Middleton is dead theory. Now, I'm not going to go through the whole thing again, but essentially, she underwent abdominal surgery earlier in the year. It was confirmed by the palace, but then she disappeared, and people were speculating about what happened to her. And there was this photograph that was released that was heavily edited, and it was absolutely torn apart. But then she did come out and confirm in a video message that she was undergoing chemotherapy and that she was ill and she needed some time. And then she showed up to the Trooping the Colour in June, and that seemed to finally put to bed all of the crazy rumours. And this really did take over the internet for months, and I'm among those who got swept up in that. But it was just wild to watch. Another moment, and just because I'm a sucker for cute animals, I cannot skip Moodeng and Pesto. It was the year of the cute zoo animal. Starting with Moodeng, the pygmy hippo at a Thai zoo became so popular that visitors to the park had to be limited to 5 minutes at a time before being moved on. She was this shiny, sassy little gal taking the internet by storm. And Moodeng means bouncy pork, which totally fits with her demeanour. She's not very demure. She's not very mindful, which was another memeable moment of 2024. Pesto, meantime, was the emperor penguin chick at Melbourne's Sea Life Aquarium who went viral. Katy Perry and Olivia Rodrigo visited him. Basically, he was just giant and cute and fluffy, and people were obsessed with him. Update, currently he has no more feathers and he's swimming. So great news for Pesto as we wrap up 2024. And look, you can't look back at this year, I think, without acknowledging that it was the year a new guard was ushered in to take over pop music. We had Charlie XCX,
Yeah, 360. When you're in the mirror, do you know what you see?
Chapel Roan, and of course, Sabrina Carpenter.
Think about me every night. Oh, isn't that sweet? I guess so.
And they all dominated. And it was this celebration, I feel, of a new generation of women who are bold, they're unapologetic, they talk about sexual things, and they talk about real shit. And my hat's off to them. I think it was so nice to see this new guard of female pop musicians in 2024. That's my pop culture list. Bension, what about you?
I would argue that one of the biggest moments in popular and internet culture this year happened very recently. I am, of course, talking about Luigi Mangione, who's been charged with murder. Now, Sash, I shit you not. In the past 24 hours, I've seen on Instagram Reels an eyebrow stylist talking about what she would do with Luigi's big bushies. I've seen an artist painting his portrait in the style of Caravaggio, and an ad for T-shirts with the words Italian Boy Winter and pictures of his face. Now, I think this is one of the most fascinating stories in popular culture in 2024 because of what it says about society in general, about how incredibly furious people are, not only at the American health insurance industry, but in corporates and in corporations in general. And it'll be really interesting to see how, I suppose, that culture manifests in 2025. But some final things before we wrap on that. Obviously, we have to talk about Gina Reinhardt and her attempt to get her portrait taken down from the National Gallery. There was massive moments in streaming with Baby Reindeer. Do you remember the subsequent $100 million plus lawsuit against Netflix with the woman allegedly identified as the stalker in the series? We cannot forget Beyoncé's Country Not Country album, Cowboy Carter. Bodyguard topped my Spotify Wrapped this year, even though I have recently learned that Spotify Wrapped might be lying to all of us. Anyway, that's another story.
That's a hook for the new year.
That's a hook for the new year. We also had the launch of Oasis's reunion tour and the disgusting but very compelling Saltburn.
Oh, and before we wrap completely, I just want to quickly mention Wicked and the press tour. We covered it on the pod the other week, and we just need to hold some space for it right now. So collectively, okay, space held. Thank you, Wicked. Thank you, 2024. What a year. Some real highs, some absolutely devastating lows. Bension, you have been here through it all on The Briefing. Thank you so much, and thank you for joining me today.
Thanks, Sacha.
That was The Briefing's Bension Siebert joining me to break down all the biggest moments of the year. And that is it for 2024. For the next 2 weeks, we will be bringing you some of our most clicked on deep dives from the last 12 months while our team has, let's face it, a very well-deserved break. Now, you will still be able to hear the day's biggest news headlines every morning at 6 right here in the feed, and that is thanks to the Listener Newsroom team. On behalf of everyone here at The Briefing, I did want to thank our listeners so much for tuning in this year, for interacting with us on socials, and for sending us your thoughts throughout 2024. And I also need to shout out our amazing team working both on the pod and behind the scenes, to my co-hosts who work tirelessly to not only voice but also write and produce the content you hear every single day, Chris Spiru, Antoinette Latouf, and you, Bension Siebert, our EP, Jessica Wukyanov, and senior producer Helen Smith, without whom let's face it, none of this would happen. And Chris Spiru also earns a spot on the producing team shout out. Thank you so much to all of you. Our audio images, Matt Curry, or Cuz, as we prefer to call him, and Chris Marshy, the pair who are responsible for every single episode making it into the feed and sounding amazing. Thank you both. Our social media team of Sarah Boll, Kurt Hughes, Caitlin Dewan and Trisha Mifsud, who work together to spread the briefing stories on Instagram, TikTok and YouTube. Thank you. And finally, to the incredible head of factual here at Listener, Claire Weaver, who is one of the briefing's biggest supporters and backers. We couldn't do it without you. And we are looking forward to another massive year in 2025, bringing you all the news you need to know. And of course, it is an Australian election year, so there are plenty of big stories to look forward to. As always, if you like what we do here at The Briefing, a great way you can show your support is by sharing our eps with people you know or on your socials. And speaking of, make sure you are following us on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast and also subscribed to our YouTube channel, which is Listener Newsroom. Okay, I'm Sacha Barbour Gatt. We'll see you on January 6th at 6 a.m. as we crack into 2025. Thank you. Have a wonderful Christmas if you celebrate it and an excellent new year.
Listener.